My name is Martha Willis. I'm 68 years old, and last Memorial Day, I found myself lying in a hospital bed with no one by my side. The light from the high windows hit me straight in the eyes, so bright I couldn't see the nurse's face at first. It was 11:12 a. I remember the time because I had nothing else to focus on, just the sharp light, the sterile smell, and the way the ceiling had a crack that looked like it had been there longer than most of the staff. A soft voice came through the glare. "Would you like another blanket?" the nurse asked. I nodded. Not because I needed it, but because something inside me had just collapsed and I didn't know what else to do. The last time I rode in an ambulance was when my husband Gerald had his heart attack. This time, it was for me. And as the paramedic asked me to confirm my birth year, I said 1956, but in my head I was somewhere else. Back in a time when my mother was still alive and being sick didn't feel so lonely. In the ambulance, they asked if I had anyone to notify. I gave them my son's number. Just one number. That was all I had. When the call went to voicemail, the EMT left a message. He said it gently, like he wasn't expecting much. I stared at the green light blinking on the monitor and tried not to think too hard about the fact that after nearly 7 decades of life, I had only one person to call. They wheeled me into a room on the east side of the building, near the hallway that still smelled like floor wax. The nurse, Julia, fastened something to my wrist and told me to stay calm. I nodded again, not because I couldn't speak, but because I didn't want to cry in front of her. Lunch came around noon. A plastic tray with my name printed on it sat in front of me, the ink already starting to fade. There was watery oatmeal, a cup of orange jello, and a small glass of water with no ice. I didn't touch it. I just looked at it, like maybe if I stared long enough, the tray would offer some kind of comfort. It didn't. Then my phone buzzed. Jason. I paused before answering. Loud music poured through the line, glasses clinking, someone laughing. I could hear the kind of noise that happens at a party you're not invited to. "Hey, Mom," Jason said. His voice was casual, distracted. "You okay?" I said I was in the hospital. There was a beat of silence, just long enough to notice. Then he said, "We're at brunch for Melanie. Her birthday. Are you okay?" The question felt like an afterthought. I looked up at the ceiling and all I saw were cracks and the kind of white paint that hospitals never bothered to freshen. "Go take care of Melanie," I said. I didn't wait for his response. I don't remember the rest of the day too well, only that the taxi driver didn't say a word when he dropped me off. He just handed me the receipt and drove away like I was any other fare. I stood outside my house for a moment, not because I'd forgotten where the key was, but because I suddenly felt like I shouldn't need it, like I should have been expected, welcomed, noticed. The key was still under the ceramic frog pot on the front step. I bent down, picked it up, brushed off some damp leaves, and slipped it into the lock. It turned with a sound that felt too familiar, too final. Inside, everything was just as I left it. And yet, not one thing felt like it had waited for me. The house was quiet and not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that makes you realize no one had been thinking about you while you were gone. I set my small overnight bag on the hallway bench and stood still for a long time. No messages, no missed calls, no one asking how I was. That's when I realized something I didn't want to admit. I was only visible when I was useful, and the moment I wasn't, I disappeared. That's how the story began. With a phone call no one answered the right way. And me, walking back into a house that used to feel like mine. The moment I stepped inside, the house felt colder than I remembered. Not because of the weather, but because of the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that pressed into your chest, that reminded you no one had missed your presence. The living room still looked the same, but something had shifted. Gerald's old armchair was exactly where he left it, right by the window, the cushion still a little sunken from years of him leaning into it. I stood next to it and rested my hand on the worn armrest, half expecting it to be warm. I turned on the radio out of habit. The same NPR voice drifted in, talking about rising home prices and how young families were struggling to find their first house. The words passed through the air, but one sentence stuck to the wall like smoke. Someone, somewhere, was already planning to own what I wasn't done living in. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and reached for the old box of tea. Same yellow box, nearly empty. I pulled out Gerald's favorite mug, the one with the tiny crack near the handle. I used to say I'd glue it back. I never did. The water boiled, but I forgot to pour. I stood staring at the tile floor, clean and cold, like no one had cooked here in days. The decorative plates above the stove were still there, but they looked more like props than memories now. Then came the knock. Not loud, just two light taps, like someone testing if I was still here. I opened the door to see Agnes, my neighbor from 2 houses down, holding a peach cobbler wrapped in plastic. She gave me a small smile and said she saw the kitchen light. Thought I might be back. I told her I'd gotten home that morning. She looked behind me for a second, like checking for signs of life, then asked if no one had picked me up. I shook my head. Her face didn't show surprise, just a kind of quiet understanding. She handed me the cobbler and said she figured I could use something sweet. Then she added, softly? Almost like it wasn't meant for me to hear, that she'd seen Melanie at the cafe the other day, asking a local realtor about my house, speaking like she already owned it. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My fingers tightened just slightly on the foil lid of the cobbler. Agnes didn't press. She just walked in and sat in the same chair she always used when Gerald was alive. The sun had started to dip, casting a soft orange light across the room. Dust floated quietly through the beam, settling on the framed pictures we stopped dusting years ago. I brought out 2 small plates, the same chipped ones we always used for guests we trusted. As I sliced into the cobbler, I listened to Agnes mutter something about how fast kids move these days. Can't even let the old folks breathe before they start eyeing what's next. I still didn't answer. But inside me, the words were already turning. The truth didn't hit like a slap. It settled slowly, like rain leaking through a roof you thought was still strong. Ellie showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with a pink suitcase, a backpack that looked too heavy for her small frame, and a blank expression that didn't match her age. Jason had texted me earlier that morning, said she'd be staying with me for a while since Melanie had late meetings and Ellie's school was closer to my house. She didn't complain. She didn't even ask why I looked tired or why there were 2 cups of cold tea on the counter from the night before. She just walked in and sat at the kitchen table like she'd done it 1,000 times. Over the next couple of days, Ellie moved through the house like someone trying not to wake something. She watched everything. Her eyes scanned the walls, the old furniture, the photos that hadn't been straight in years. One morning, while I folded towels, she stood at the bookshelf and pulled out a picture frame. It was from 1983. Gerald and I were laughing, him in a light blue shirt, me in a dress with tiny flowers that used to make me feel young. She tilted the frame to catch the light and asked when it was taken. Before your dad was born, I said, back when we still rented a small apartment downtown. She studied it for a moment, then said he kind of smiles like Grandpa. She didn't say anything else, but I saw it in her eyes. She knew more than she let on. That evening, while I was sweeping near the back door, Ellie walked up holding something small in her hand. It was a black USB stick, a note taped to it with 2 short lines in her handwriting. Grandma should listen to Thursday night. I didn't ask her what it was. I just nodded. Her fingers brushed mine when she handed it over, and I felt something there that I hadn't felt in a long time, trust without conditions. That night, after she had fallen asleep in the guest room, I sat down at my old desk and plugged the USB into my laptop. 1 folder, 1 audio file. I put on my headphones and hit play. The first few seconds were just ambient sounds. Footsteps, a faucet running, a fridge door. Then Melanie's voice cut through, low and sharp. As soon as she signs, it's done. She doesn't really ask questions, right? Jason's voice followed, tired and unsure. I don't think so, but she's been different lately. Different how she's always quiet. That's our advantage. Then Melanie laughed. Not the kind that comes from joy, but the kind that sounds like a blade sliding out of its sheath. That house is just step 1, she said. Then we roll everything into a condo near the city. Ellie gets into that charter school. Everyone wins. The room around me didn't move. I didn't move. But the air felt heavier with each word, as if the walls themselves had heard it all before I did. The voices weren't strangers. They were my son, his wife, my family. They weren't building a future. They were drawing a blueprint for my removal. I took off the headphones slowly. My hands didn't shake, but something in my chest had gone completely still. I stared at the screen. It had gone dark, but my reflection was still visible, faint but familiar. I leaned in closer and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with things I'd ignored for years. The subtle dismissals, the missed birthdays, the way Melanie never quite called me by name. I closed the laptop and placed the USB back in the drawer. The note Ellie had written was still on my desk. The handwriting tilted slightly, like mine used to when I was young. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table while the clock ticked past midnight, the same way it had ticked through every ordinary moment I thought was safe. But it wasn't ordinary anymore. The next morning, Ellie came into the kitchen quietly and started pouring pancake batter into a bowl. She didn't say anything until I sat beside her. Then she looked at me and asked if I'd listened. I nodded. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. That small, quiet moment was the beginning of everything I was about to change. The law office hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. Maybe 15 years ago? The carpet was still a muted beige with tiny navy diamonds. And the reception desk still had that old candy jar with stale peppermints. The only thing that felt different was me. Harold Tinsley came out to greet me, wearing the same loosened tie and soft expression I remembered. His hair had thinned, but his voice was steady, kind. We made small talk for a moment about the weather, about how fast the trees had bloomed that spring, but I think we both knew why I was there. I reached into my purse and pulled out two things: the envelope with Gerald's handwriting and the small gray pouch with the USB Ellie had given me. I placed them gently on his desk, side by side, like pieces in a puzzle no one else had bothered to solve. He didn't ask questions right away. He just opened the envelope first. I watched his eyes move across the page. When he reached the line about not letting anyone move me unless it was my choice, he exhaled. Just barely. A breath that understood more than he let on. He plugged the USB into his laptop and opened the audio file. I sat quietly while it played, staring at the bookshelf behind him. When the voices of my son and his wife echoed across the room, something in Harold's jaw shifted. He didn't pause the recording. He let it run its full length, every word, every laugh. When it ended, he closed the file and turned toward me. He said the title on the house had never been amended. My name was still the only one on it. No transfer requests, no pending power of attorney. Gerald had left everything to me, just like he said he would. I nodded. I already knew, but hearing it out loud felt like opening a locked window I hadn't touched in years. I told Harold I wanted to sell the house, not out of anger, but out of clarity. He asked if I wanted to inform Jason and Melanie. I said no. I didn't owe them that. What I wanted was to move everything into a trust, a protected account under Ellie's name. She wouldn't access it until she was of age. No one else would touch a single cent. Harold leaned back slightly, as if measuring the weight of what I had decided. Then he nodded and began drafting the new documents. I sat across from him, watching the printer hum and spit out page after page. There was no hesitation in me, no second guessing. I had been quiet most of my life, always accommodating, always smoothing things over so everyone else could feel at ease. But this wasn't smoothing. This was setting the ground straight. Harold slid the first page toward me. I scanned the lines, the formal language, the dates. At the bottom, there was a blank space waiting for my name. The last time I signed something for both Gerald and me was our marriage license. This time, it was something else entirely. It was mine alone. I picked up the pen, and my hand didn't tremble. My signature landed sharp and certain. Martha L. Willis. Harold took the paper and pressed the notary stamp into red wax. The imprint looked final, solid, like something no one could undo. He asked what I planned to do next. I told him I'd pack slowly, let the house say goodbye in its own way. Then I'd find someplace small, something I could clean in one afternoon and fill with only what mattered. He didn't say much, just nodded and placed the sealed documents in a folder. Before I left, I looked at the envelope again. Gerald's writing, the tilt of his R, the underline under my name. That letter had waited quietly for years. Now, it had done its job. It reminded me I didn't need anyone's permission to protect what was mine. When I stepped outside, the wind caught my coat. The sky was heavy with late spring clouds, but I didn't mind. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't walking out of fear. I was walking out of decision, and I wasn't looking back. They came on a Sunday afternoon, just before the sun dipped behind the tall hedges along the fence. Jason was wearing a pressed shirt, the one he always saved for holidays, and Melanie stood beside him in a beige dress, her hair curled to perfection. Jason held a bouquet of white lilies, and I could tell just by the way they stood on my porch that they weren't here to apologize. They were here to negotiate. I didn't answer the door. I stood just out of view behind the curtain while Harold stepped out of his car, holding a thick red envelope in one hand and a quiet authority in the other. He greeted them politely, not warm, not cold, just enough to make it clear he wasn't on their side. Jason blinked in confusion, shifting the flowers from one hand to the other. Melanie's smile tightened at the corners as she asked if I was home. Harold said nothing, only handed Jason the envelope. On the front, in my handwriting, was a simple message. I'm not dead, but I no longer need you. Jason frowned. He peeled open the seal and pulled out the first page. It was the deed of sale. Beneath it, trust documents, legal confirmation that the house was no longer in my name, and that every cent had been placed into a protected account for Ellie. Melanie leaned in, flipping through the pages, her expression shifting from pleasant to sharp. Then she found the transcript from the USB recording. The one where she said I wouldn't ask questions. The one where Jason agreed. Her voice was quieter now, but it carried a hard edge. You created a trust. You sold the house without even telling us. I stepped out slowly then, calm and still. I didn't look at her. I looked at Jason, but he wasn't really looking at me. His eyes were on the paper, as if hoping he could read it again and find something different. Melanie's smile was gone. You don't think Ellie will resent you for this, she said. You're tearing her away from her parents. I met her gaze, steady and unshaken. No, I think she'll learn not to bow to toxic love. Just then, Ellie appeared at the top of the stairs. She didn't say anything. She simply stood there, barefoot, with one hand resting on the banister. Her presence alone made the room feel different. She walked down slowly and came to stand beside me. Her hand slipped into mine, small and warm. I didn't need to look at her to know what she was saying. I could feel it in her grip. Jason looked at her for the first time. Really looked. Something flickered in his eyes, but it wasn't courage. It wasn't guilt either. It was recognition. Like he finally understood I wasn't going to fold the way I always had. Melanie straightened her shoulders and muttered something under her breath. Let's go. Jason hesitated, just for a breath, then followed her out. He didn't say goodbye. Harold stepped inside once the door closed, setting the folder down on the table. He gave me a brief nod before returning to his car. It was all done. Everything was signed, sealed, filed. I stood in the living room for a long moment, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It had weight. It had meaning. Ellie and I sat down on the couch, and I held her close without speaking. I didn't need to say thank you. She didn't need to ask why I did what I did. We both understood. Outside, the light shifted across the floorboards, warming the old oak one last time. I looked toward the wall where our wedding photo once hung. The nail was still there, but the space was bare. It didn't feel like a loss. It felt like release. Later that evening, I packed up the last few boxes. Books, towels, a small photo of Gerald with his arm around me at the county fair. The kind of photo where the love is in the way we're not looking at the camera but at each other. Ellie helped carry things to the door. She didn't ask where we were going. She just trusted me. That was all I ever needed. I looked around the house one last time, not with sadness, but with finality. I had lived here for over 40 years. But I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was leaving in choice, and that made all the difference. I left the house quietly, just as the sun was beginning to rise. There were no hugs, no waves from the porch, no neighbors leaning over their fences to say goodbye. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't need any of that. The moving truck had come early, just a few cardboard boxes labeled by hand. Linens, books, a couple of framed photos that still meant something. I sat in the front seat beside the driver, holding a bag of small things I didn't want bouncing around in the back. Blue Fern Hollow was 20 minutes outside town, tucked behind a row of maple trees and quiet sidewalks. My new apartment was a one-bedroom unit with white walls and a crooked wooden clock above the kitchen table. The floorboards didn't creak, and the windows opened easily. That first morning, I stood barefoot in the kitchen while the kettle warmed on the stove. Sunlight poured through the glass and stretched across the floor in soft gold. The walls smelled like fresh paint, and something floral drifted in through the open-screen jasmine. Maybe, or whatever peace smells like. I reached for the same yellow box of tea and pulled out a packet. No sugar, no milk, just the routine. Just me. I let the tea sit while I stepped out onto the small balcony, letting the breeze settle into my sweater and my skin. The lavender plant I'd brought in the car now sat on the railing in a chipped ceramic pot. It looked too small for the space, but something about it made it feel like home. I bent to check the soil and found myself smiling for no particular reason. Later that day, I called Agnes. She answered like she'd been expecting me. I told her the place was quiet, that I'd found a secondhand bookshelf and a new pair of slippers. She told me she missed our porch chats, and I told her she could come visit anytime she liked. We didn't talk long, we didn't need to. There are some friendships that say everything just by calling. Before she hung up, she said the town already felt different without me. I told her I felt different too. That afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a white envelope from the school district. Inside was the official confirmation that Ellie's school records had been updated. It said she now lived with her maternal grandmother, Martha Willis. My name was handwritten in purple ink, tilted just slightly. It was the same tilt I had taught Ellie years ago when she made her first birthday card. I sat down with the envelope in my lap and ran my fingers across the curve of each letter. There was no parade, no celebration, no big moment, just a kitchen that smelled like jasmine, a window open to a new kind of stillness, and a girl who had chosen me. Not for obligation, not for need, but for something softer and harder to name. That night, I changed into my robe and stood by the hallway mirror. I looked older, I looked lighter. I looked like someone who had walked away before the world told her it was time. It was a Friday evening when Ellie showed up at the door, her backpack slung over one shoulder and a small suitcase rolling behind her. Tucked under her arm was the cat-shaped pillow I had given her 3 Christmases ago, the one with the crooked whiskers she used to sleep with at my house when she was little. She didn't say anything when I opened the door. She just smiled like she already knew she was exactly where she belonged. I didn't ask why she came. I didn't ask if Jason and Melanie knew. I just stepped aside and let her in. She walked past me like someone returning to a room that had been waiting for her, and I felt something shift, gently and deeply, in my chest. We didn't rearrange much, just swapped out the tablecloth for one with yellow flowers and moved 2 chairs to face the window. She pulled open the curtains, let the late sun pour in, and stood there for a while, as if memorizing the shape of the light on the floor. Later, we planted a new lavender pot on the balcony together. Her hands were small but certain as she scooped the soil. Mine were slower, but steady. When we finished, she had dirt on her wrists and a smudge across her cheek. I handed her a towel. She didn't take it. She just laughed and wiped her hands on her jeans. That night, we sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea between us. I told her about a handkerchief Gerald used to carry. It was beige, with a blue-stitched border and a tiny H in the corner. I said I kept it, not for the memories, but because it never lied to me. She looked at me for a long time after that. Her voice was soft, but certain. Now I have a home. Not because it's a house, but because someone's waiting for me. I didn't speak for a moment. I just reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. It was warm, real, and full of something I thought I had lost belonging. That weekend, she helped me alphabetize my old books and found a folded napkin I had once used as a bookmark. She teased me about my handwriting and made grilled cheese with too much butter. We sat on the floor and ate while the news played in the background, but neither of us really listened. We were too busy being still. Together, I watched her that night as she curled up on the couch with her cat pillow tucked under her arm. The television glowed quietly across the room, but her eyes were already drifting shut. I pulled the blanket over her shoulders and sat beside her for a while, letting the quiet fill the space around us. There was no need to explain anything. No one was asking for permission. In that little apartment with crooked floorboards and lavender on the balcony, we had found something most people spend their whole lives chasing: safety, love, truth without conditions. She came to me not because I asked, but because she knew, and I stayed. Not because I had nowhere else to go, but because she gave me a reason to belong again. Sometimes family isn't about blood or duty. Sometimes it's just about choosing each other when it matters most. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror with the soft light buzzing faintly above me. My silver hair was a little uneven around the ears, and there were shadows under my eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago. But my gaze was steady, clear in a way I hadn't seen in decades. I looked at myself for a long time before whispering, "Hello, Martha. It's good to finally meet you," and I meant it. For most of my life, I moved like a piece of furniture, quiet, steady, expected. I was the one who stayed calm when others shouted, the one who showed up when no one else did, like a chair in the corner of the room, always there, always holding weight that didn't belong to me. People don't notice chairs. They notice when they're missing or when they creak too loud, but not when they're doing their job. And I was good at doing mine. I held my family up through illness, debt, hard winters, broken birthdays, and the empty kind of silence that forms between people who used to love each other. I held them through everything, thinking that's what love meant. But chairs don't last forever, and neither does quiet. When I left the house, no one saw me off, and for the first time, I didn't wait for them to. I didn't leave because I was pushed. I left because I chose to, and that, more than anything, is what made it mine. I used to believe that if I kept giving, eventually they'd see me. Eventually they'd say, "Thank you." But what I learned was this: if you never stand up for yourself, even your own family will get used to looking down at you. Ellie helped me understand that, not with speeches or big gestures, just with the way she walked toward me when no one else would, with the way she listened, the way she stayed. She didn't ask for permission to love me, and I didn't ask for permission to protect her. We chose each other, and that choice saved me. So now, when I sit in my own chair, in my own space, with lavender on the windowsill and light hitting the floor just right, I don't feel forgotten. I feel free. I feel like someone who finally picked up the pieces of herself and said, "Enough." If you're listening to this and you've ever felt like a chair in your own family, like someone whose only role was to hold others up while they forgot you were still there, maybe it's time you stood up. Not to leave, not to break things, but to begin. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk out while you're still alive, still whole, still yourself. And if this story feels familiar, if you've lived through something like this, I'd love to hear your voice in the comments. Maybe your story will help someone else stand too. Thank you for sitting with me, for really seeing me. My name is Martha, and I am not a chair anymore.